We'll go ahead and call to order the meeting of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority Finance and Administration Committee meeting of Monday, November 30th. Could I have a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you. Committee Chair Rennie.
Here.
Committee Vice Chair Elahi.
Present.
Director Gibbons.
Here.
Committee Member Oberg.
Here, sorry.
Thank you, no worries. And absent currently is Director Miller, and we do have a quorum.
All right, thank you. So next up on our agenda is public comment. Let's see, do we have any member of the public which wishes to address us on an item which is not on today's agenda? I don't see any hands raised from the attendees. So I'll go ahead and close public comment and move on to our consent calendar, which consists only of the minutes of September 15th. Would any member of our committee wish to make changes or pull that item?
I'd move approval.
Okay, I have a motion for approval. And do I have a second? I'll second it. Let me check with the public. Would any member of the public wish to comment on the consent calendar? Don't see any hands raised. So let's go ahead and have a vote. Sorry about the background noise.
No worries. I will start with you, Committee Chair Rennie.
Yes.
Thank you. Committee Vice Chair Elahi.
Yes.
Gibbons.
Yes, I believe I made the motion.
Oh, thank you. I will make that change that you made the motion and Committee Chair, or excuse me, Chair Rennie seconded. Oberg.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries with Director Miller absent.
Okay, so that then brings us to our regular calendar, which first item on it is the CEO's update and discussion. So I'll turn it over to Girish.
Thank you, Rob. Quick two-item update. First, just in a broad picture, I wanted to tell you that as we get to the end of the year, we're going into board election season, so to speak. All your elections are done. But on the December board meeting, Andrea will be introducing an item. I just want to give you a heads up on that, a couple of things. One is, as Howard and Nancy are both termed out, the executive committee will be making a recommendation to the board to allow for an interim chair just to start the January meeting. And so that's something that'll come to you in the form of a change to our operating rules and regs, because this may happen again the next time we have elections too. So we want to kind of structurally kind of make that change. And what the executive committee recommended is it would be, I believe, the immediate past chair if available, or if the immediate past chair is not available, it would be the longest serving board member for whatever, whether it's a committee or the entire board. So I think in this case, if we apply that, it would be Margaret would be the chair for the first part of the January meeting when she can run the elections for everyone. So it's just a small little administrative thing, but just to update you that we discussed that at the exec committee. And maybe more importantly for all of you and the finance committee, the committees will be set up at the February board meeting, which would be February 10th. And we'll have, Andrea will be sending out the memo where you can express your interest in serving on committees. So that's a heads up that you'll be seeing on December 9th at the board meeting. The second update is you are all invited to a social event on December 4th. It's a virtual board staff social event, and it is open to all of you. So please do, if you have time on your calendar, please do attend. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. There's going to be entertainment from board members and staff, and opportunities for some laughter and gratitude and looking back and looking forward. So that's December 4th, 3 to 5 p.m. Friday. That's all I have for my CEO report. The rest of the items are scheduled in the calendar.
Okay, let's see if any members of the public wish to speak on the CEO's report. I don't see any hands raised. Please raise your virtual hand. And I don't see any, so we will close public comment. Would any member of our committee wish to comment or ask questions about the CEO's report? I don't see any hands being raised, so we will close item number 2 and move on to item number 3, which is the California Community Power Super JPA. Next steps and discussion.
Thank you, Chair Rennie. So this is going to be a similar kind of update that Greg Stepanisic and I provided to the board at the last meeting. This is a little bit of a belt and suspenders update, given that we said we'll update the Finance Committee if needed. There really wasn't a direction per se, but we thought, hey, it's always good to use a committee meeting to provide you any background you need or information. So let's go. Let's go to the next slide. And just in terms of background, we have 9 CCAs participating in the creation of this California Community Power JPA. Next slide. And the business need for CC Power is essentially it enhances, it adds to SVCE's options. There are certain things SVCE can do independently very well, but there's certain things that CCAs really need. And here on the left-hand side are the kinds of business needs that would initiate kind of doing a kind of joint project. And the first one of those joint projects that we are contemplating using CC Power to transact is the long duration energy storage project. So we're kind of doing it in parallel. We've got lots of good feedback from the legislature and the CPUC. And they do recognize that we are being proactive, but we are also moving into, especially when it comes to long duration energy storage, we don't really know what the costs are going to be or what technology we'll select. We are kind of in the beginning stages of that technology maturation. But this is essentially what we are looking at. So next slide. Previous discussions that we've had with the board and exec committee, so you have it here, but on the bottom left of your screen is what we got the feedback from the November 13th meeting from the entire board. We had a discussions of benefit and risks. There was a strong support to move forward, and we had indicated we'll be bringing it back to the board at the December 9th meeting. So we'll have, in addition to a presentation, we'll also have a written report, a regular staff report, which goes through pretty much everything that we've said before, but it's a way of memorializing a lot of what we've talked about. Next slide. So here's the timing that other CCAs have in place, and this is what we've gathered so far on getting it on their approval calendar. MCE actually had their CC Power JPA participation in it approved last week. Next one up is going to be SVCE, and then soon after that we'll have PCE and RCEA. And then in January, it's going to be Sonoma, 3CE, and Clean Power SF. So we expect by the middle of January or so, we should have the majority of us having approved joining. And then, of course, we're going to go, we'll have to file with the Secretary of State. There's a bunch of administrative things that have to be done. So that's the timeline for 8 of the 9 CCAs going forward. We're not aware of what EBCE's timeline is right now. I now want to turn it over to Greg Stepanisic. He has a couple of slides, which he'll go through kind of as a summary of what he's presented before at the board meeting. So Greg?
Be happy to go through these. And I have condensed now the 2 slides from my prior presentation here to really focus on the key legal terms of the Super JPA agreement. And the central provision is that SVCE, by joining, will not be responsible for the debts, liabilities, and obligations of CC Power with respect to contracts or other actions taken by the CC Power Board of Directors, and will only assume financial obligations if there is a CC approved project, but most importantly, one that SVCE itself decides to voluntarily join. And it can only voluntarily decide to join a project if that project is approved by our board. And at that point, there would be a project agreement presented to our board for approval, and we would go through that in great details, because under that contract there would be financial obligations being assumed by SVCE. The overall administration of CC Power, which will have very limited operating costs, because most costs are going to be really transferred over to the individual projects, but it's going to be very simple. It's all shared on an equal basis by the members, regardless of size. And unless there is a change in the cost allocation formula, voted on by 2/3 vote of the entire board. This will be different with the project agreements, because with the project agreements, cost sharing will be done on an individualized basis with respect to the members that are part of that project and the nature of the project itself. The board directors will be 1 director per member, with each member having 1 vote. And the directors will be either the CEO or general manager of the member, or their designee who serve in their place. If we go to the next slide, we'll talk just very briefly about some of the membership and management issues, and that is the membership itself would be made up of only CCAs, but also could include other public agencies if the board of directors of CC Power adopts a policy that actually defines what other types of public agencies are entitled to become a member of CC Power. Amendments to the agreement are going to be done similar to how SVCE does amendments to its joint powers agreement, in that 2/3 vote of the entire board can approve the amendment, but there is some additional limitations here for this one, which does reserve powers to the members themselves to approve certain of the amendments that are the most significant, such as if the powers of CC Power were changed, the membership was changed in nature, the limitations on liability provisions were changed, or CC Power itself was going to be terminated. In that case, 2/3 of the members would have to vote to approve that, and that would be the governing boards of the members. 2/3 of those would have to approve for those items to become effective. Withdrawal is made very simple from CC Power, provided that there are no outstanding obligations owed by the member to CC Power. And most likely, there will not be obligations owed by a member to CC Power, again, as I mentioned, unless they're specifically assumed by the member. And that's going to be in the context of this JPA. It will be in the context of a project agreement. So if a member withdraws from CC Power as a member, that would be a pretty easy process, but that member will still be a party to the project agreement. And that project agreement will define and govern how any party can withdraw from the project itself, since that's going to be a more complicated process.
Okay, thank you, Greg. So this is our last slide to obtain any comments that we may have from Finance Committee members. And our plan right now is to schedule this for approval by the board at the December 9th meeting. So, Andre, you can cut the slide and we can take questions. So hand it back to the chair.
Okay, I see lots of hands up. Let's why don't we go to the public first, see if the public, any member of the public wishes to speak on this item? We have one attendee. I don't see them raising their hand. So I will come back to our committee, and I'll start with Javed.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. I know you've gone through this a number of times. I just had some thoughts and some comments, I guess, maybe. The representative for SVC is going to be the CEO or a designee. Now, is a designee somebody that the board is going to designate, or is it
No.
the designee somebody the COE is going to designate?
CEO designates.
Yes, I'm wondering why the board does not have that power to designate its own representative to the joint power. What's the thought behind that? As a public agency, I guess we should be in control as to who represents us with somebody else.
Yeah. So, Greg, you want to take a crack at that?
Sure. Yeah, I think the thought here was for this JPA, which would be very project oriented, that it would be the CEOs or general managers of the CCAs who would be on the board dealing with, the administrative matters involving the CCA. And so I think it's a little different from the respect to our CCAs in general, which are, have probably a larger policy driven focus. And so that was the thinking here. And with respect to the designee, again, it would be someone who would be the someone that the CEO felt was in administrative capacity and would be serving in that role on behalf of the CEO. And again, this is again, enjoying the JPA, this is a judgment to be made as to who should make up the board. And in our case, our board would have to make that decision. Does this make sense in this particular type of JPA, which is really a very specialized type of JPA? Does it make sense to have the CEOs involved at the table making those decisions? But a key factor here is that if there's going to be any project agreement, that's going to come back to the board. So the CEO is going to have no power to approve a project agreement. That's going to have to be approved by the SVCE board itself.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that, and I think they should do an outstanding job. But I am just concerned there may be some representative that the board doesn't like anymore, but we have no power to remove them. And we'll continue representing us at the JPA, which could do a 2/3 amendment or do something else. So I'd like to have the board have some say-so as to who's going to be representing the board. It could be one of our directors, or it could be somebody that we designate. And so I'm concerned about just giving all that power away and have no recourse to take it back. I understand about the project agreements and all that, but there's still a lot of stuff that's going to go on from day to day.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one comment, and I think you responded to that. But let me just ask a couple more questions, if you don't mind, Chair. One has to do with the 2/3 amendments vote requirement. Does that apply to somebody who wants to terminate? Can the JP amend it and say nobody can leave unless we give a 2/3 approval? Or as a member, are we able to get out anytime we want?
As a member, you can get out anytime you want. If the JPA board was going to try to put restrictions on membership or withdrawal of membership, that process there would still be an ability for the member to withdraw before that amendment would become effective. So and again, in the case of the SVCE JPA agreement, it takes a 180-day notice period to withdraw, but this one is immediate. So therefore, there is no delay if SVC board decided to withdraw from the JPA.
Okay. Couple other questions. I guess the JPA is going to approve negotiate any agreements. And I'm trying to figure out, is that going to be a public meeting at which they approve it? Is there some confidentiality? Does the Brown Act apply to the JPA board? And what happens if one of the members wants to go and try to negotiate their own agreement with whoever the JPA is trying to negotiate? Is there any provisions limiting the other members from competing with the JPA in that kind of a conflict situation?
Yeah, I'll take the second part of your question. Yes, so we have discussed this with all the CEOs, and we actually have a clause in the cost sharing arrangement that no one can cherry pick. They can't get out of the RFO and do their own deal. They can get out of the RFO and issue their own RFO or RFP, but they can't cherry pick and do their own negotiations. This is intended to be the JPA interacting with the developer. The first part of your question had to do with Brown Act. Yeah, this is very similar to our meetings. It'll be basically open to the public, and yeah, there's no difference in the rules that apply to us that would apply to this JPA.
Yeah, just underscore that point. The JPA is subject fully to the Brown Act and the Public Records Act. So just in terms of transparency, all those requirements that apply to SVCE would apply to CC Power.
So just to be clear, no other member of this SVC, this JPA can go and start negotiating on their own with the provider.
That's correct.
Okay.
For the RFP that they have, that we've put out, that the JPA has put out.
I understand that, but before the RFP is done, when you identify a provider,
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out if one of us, can run through and say, okay, now I'm going to try to see if I can get a better.
Yeah, that's the whole point of actually creating this, right? It's economies of scale. And so
All right,
an individual can't.
thanks.
So before I go to the next one, let me just ask a follow-up question to Javed's question. Girish, the person you're planning to delegate, if it's not yourself, would it be a staff member or would you have a contractor?
No, it'll be a staff member.
And does it
Yes.
say that in the agreement, staff member?
No, it's up to me who it is, but I would say it'll most likely be the CFO or director of power supply.
Yeah, I was wondering if Javed would be more comfortable if we specified it had to be an employee of SVCE.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be
So-
comfortable if that power is with the board. I mean, Girish is excellent, but 5 years or 10 years down the road, you may have somebody that we're not comfortable with, and they're representing us on the JPA, and we have no say so on being able to remove them.
Okay, thank you. I just had to see if that idea would fly at all. I guess not. Let me go to Liz. Is up next.
Okay, so I wanted to give some feedback on some of Javed's questions too. But I'll start with my two questions. There was in one of Greg's slides, there was talking about participation. And I just wanted to clarify that when you pay the fees to join the JPA, it's equal. So if there are 9 members, each member gets charged the same amount regardless of size. And then if one member just doesn't actively participate for whatever reason, they still pay their membership. And if they at some point wish to withdraw, there's a process for them to do so. Just trying to avoid a situation where someone comes along and says, yeah, I want to be part of this, but you aren't doing things that I want to be part of. So I don't want to pay my dues until I get involved in something I want to be part of.
And if that happened, the board has the power to expel a member. And one of the things would be non-payment of dues. That would be grounds for removing the member from the JPA.
Good, thank you, I thought so. And then there was another one on the agreements, sort of tying into what Javed was asking. In terms of sequence, the CC JPA will be issuing its own RFPs for the total purpose of having the benefit that you've outlined. Once that RFP is issued, then the JPA, this is a question, the JPA will negotiate, do all of the negotiations required to implement the selection of the RFP. But once that happens, each board, i.e. us in our case, would then be required to authorize our participation in that RFP. So it does come back to our board.
Correct.
Participate in the RFP.
Yes, so Liz, you're correct, and that's actually there's a point I wanted to make in response to Javed's question to you. Is that's exactly right. So no project agreement can be signed without your approval. So that's essentially, I don't have the power to do that. You haven't delegated that ability to me. So that's going to come back to you.
Right. So that's tying into perhaps one of Javed's other questions. We have been talking about the formation of this JPA, the CCJPA, on the group level, and that our representatives would be the executive directors. So if the board is not satisfied with the representation of our CEO on this JPA, to me, it means that we're not satisfied with the performance of the CEO
Mm-hmm.
in general, so that it will be taken up at that level. So it's not as if I have in my mind a worry that our representative on the JPA would be, the CCJPA would be out there on a limb. They are there to direct and participate and confirm that these are the right kind of RFPs and all of that. But then the formal process of review and approval comes back to our board.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think one thing that when the general counsels were discussing this agreement, I think a big factor too was this point, Liz, that you just raised, which is that clearly the control a member's board has over their CEO or general manager is that if that person's not doing a good job, they always have the right to remove them and replace them with a new CEO. And that then would be the representative. One other aspect of this, just in general, if our board became dissatisfied with just how this whole JPA was operating, we all felt it was very important to have a very easy withdrawal process. Right. And as long, and by the way, as long as there's no outstanding obligations that we would owe to the JPA, the board of the JPA has to approve the withdrawal. So they have no discretion to say, oh, no, you can't withdraw under these circumstances. It just becomes mandatory.
Right. Good, thank you. So Javed, to respond to your comment about the board having control of the representative on the CCJPA, I'm okay with it being our CEO or his designee, because I think we do in fact control what that person would in fact be doing and representing. And they actually don't commit us to anything. Everything comes back to the board to be committed.
Yeah, thank you for the comments. I still have a serious issue. I mean, we have had a president for 4 years who's supposed to go to Congress for everything else. And I don't want to have the situation where we have to throw the baby with the bathwater out, because we're really talking about drastic measures. We're going to fire the CEO if you don't like what he does, or we're going to terminate our relationship with the JPA if you don't like what happens. I'd like to avoid that and just say, hey, the board of directors can designate somebody. If you're satisfied,
why would we just ask the CEO to fix it?
The CEO is not the board. The board is the one who's going to decide.
No, Dravid, think of all the places where we are represented in the industry right now at Girish's directions, right? Are you saying that all of those should come through the board? If we had somebody on this CCA that we didn't like, wouldn't we just say, hey, Girish, we don't think this person's serving our interests. Can you fix it? I mean, that's not a drastic measure.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I guess
and putting us in the middle of the process of these appointments, which could be highly technical or highly complicated given what's coming up at the JPA, and Girish may want to bring different people in to resolve different things. It seems like the least efficient and least effective method. And since we already have a way to resolve any issues through our CEO, aren't we like picking the best of both worlds that way?
Well, I appreciate that. I still think we depend on Girish because he's doing an excellent job. I'm looking down 10 years later when we have somebody that we have some disagreements with, or we have a different board that is not staffed by the experience that you guys have. And I am saying the board should at least have a say-so on who it is. And we could say, Girish can do it, or the president or CEO at that time can do it. But if you
So
don't like
why-
it,
why-
we can change him if you want. That's all there is,
Why
rather
this,
than have to
why
fire the guy.
this? So Javed, why this one?
Well, this is
This-
a bigger thing. It's a bigger
No,
thing
this-
than a
This
contract.
is smaller than Cal CCA, right?
Well,
This is smaller than a lot of the places where we have representatives, right? Because these guys can't do nothing without us approving the contracts. They can't do nothing without us giving direction as to what we want to pursue. So,
Yeah, I know. I understand that. I mean, you've got a complete another entity that you're setting up, and we'll be dependent on our representative to tell us what's going on out there. And we may or may not get all the facts in one time. We may
You
have
mean like,
somebody
you know,
who's negotiating something in their own best interest.
So,
How do we
so,
know?
guy, it's perfectly okay for somebody to dissent. We don't have to twist Javed's arm until he agrees with us. It's
no,
perfectly fine.
I'm trying to understand the point, because if there's a valid point for this, there are places where we have representatives that could have far more direct impact on us without our opportunity for intervention. Do you think all of those should come through the board?
I think those we have enough control in place. I mean, the CEO gives us presentations, and over the months and months we look at it, and those are one-off agreements. So we have very comfortable. This is what I'm concerned about. This is a whole different board that's going to be working on its own. You've got the CEOs and all these other individuals who are also CEOs of their own committees, and they could make decisions that are in their best interest and not necessarily in the interest of the entire boards. And we should at least, I mean, we're not asking for much. I'm just saying at least we should have the opportunity to say, we want a different representative.
So how is that?
Okay, we're going to fire the
different
CEO, or we're going to fire this.
Then how is that different? No, I didn't say fire the CEO. I said we asked the CEO to fix it. How is that different than our Cal CCA representation?
The Cal CCA representation may or may not be different, but I'm just looking at this one. I mean, I'm not 100% privy to exactly how that structure works. Does the board have no say-so on who represents us at the Cal CCA? Is that
Correct.
limited to only the CEO can represent us at the CCA?
Yes.
Yeah,
We work-
that's a structure with the
we
Cal
work-
CCA. So
we work-
maybe that's a good structure, but this is a new one in front of us. Take a look at it. That's all I'm asking.
So Howard, do you have other comments? I think you're up now. Liz, you're finished, right? Yeah. So Howard, you're up for
Yes.
other comments or finish
Yeah,
that.
so unrelated to that topic,
Okay.
right? Which would be refreshing, right? So Girish, I look at this as sort of an adjunct of our operational capability. And my questions were more about timeline. When do we actually expect this thing to be up and running to the point where we could actually put out an RFO or RFP for long-term storage?
So a couple of things. We've already put out the RFP for long-term storage. So
Right.
8 of us have put out the RFP. Results will be coming in on December 1. So, and the reason we did that is because, if we had all the time in the world, we would have created the JPA and then have the JPA issue the RFO. But given that the PUC early in 2020 talked about long duration storage being something that they were interested in the IRP, given that the last 3 years we've had long duration energy storage legislative bills being introduced, we felt that it made sense to just put the RFP out, see what the market has to offer. So in January, we'll be filing with the Secretary of State to create CC Power, and the first meeting of CC Power will take place in February. So at that point, the RFO will essentially get assumed by the JPA, and the JPA will be running the next steps in the RFO. When we put the RFO out, we added that saying, right now it's the 8 of us who are issuing it, but we also intend to create this super JPA, and you will be negotiating with the super JPA. So that's the way we put it.
Okay, that answered the complicated question. So perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Rob.
Okay. I don't see any other hands up. I'll just make, let's see, Girish, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe just to touch base a little bit on what Javed mentioned. Um, the couple of ways of addressing your concern, Javed. One is to direct me to provide reports to the board. And you could direct me formally to provide monthly or quarterly reports. That way you get all the information that you need. So I think that was one of the questions you had. And I think the bad penny issue, so to speak, of someone kind of doing their own thing, that's always possible, whether it's a staff member or an elected official. You're not really going to control for that. So I get your point, but I was thinking directing me to provide regular reports to the entire board may streamline the communications so that you don't have to wait to be informed. You basically will be informed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I saw Amrit's hand go up shortly and he took it back down. Did he want to say anything? If so, raise again. It looks like not.
No, not me.
All right. I'll just, quickly make a comment that I also agree it's okay to have the CEO be, the one in charge of either being the representative or designating the representative for the reasons given. And additionally, I think it's important, if the board appointed somebody, really the interface to the JPA needs to be connected into our power procurement planning and our IRP and all of these things, right? Because that's really what the JPA is about. I think the board could end up appointing somebody that maybe isn't so connected into staff. So, I think the CEO or one of their staff members that knows what's going on is really who that person needs to be. I'll go ahead and stop. I guess Garish had a response to that.
Yeah, I think you're right. So this gets to a point of this being a very technical board and this continuity involved. So Javed, your point is actually I've been part of many JPAs. You raise a very good point, and frankly, the way to manage it, I would suggest, would be to you would direct the CEO, whether it's me or your next CEO, you would make it part of that policy that there has to be a report back to you, and then you can figure out what you want in that report to make sure that your concerns are met. But the other point that Rob just brought up was what we had discussed as a CEO group, which is it's going to be very technical and long-term. Many of these deals will span years. Even the negotiation could go through a year. And if we have turnover in our representation, it really we won't be able to put our best foot forward. We won't actually be able to effectively represent SVCE's interests if we have a non-technical person with the potential for turnover on that position too. Thank you.
Thank you. I will close this item unless anybody wishes to have last minute thoughts. Seeing only shaking heads sideways, not up and down. I will go ahead and close item number 3. It's only a discussion. We don't need a motion. So we'll go on to item number 4, which is status and timeline of long-term power prepay activities.
Thank you. And Andrea, if you could post the slide presentation and go to slide number 2. So I have with me over here, I do have Michael Berwanger also on the call with me. This is similar to the last presentation, a little bit of belt and suspenders because of complexity. I'd rather communicate more with you about this issue. So this is an overview of what the prepay would look like. We basically have a prepay buyer, which would be us, and then a prepay supplier, which would be a bank. That we would create a municipal conduit that would issue bonds at tax exempt rates, and the basic transaction, the value of the transaction comes with the delta between tax exempt and taxable rates. And that delta gets monetized through a discount to power that we would be purchasing from the prepay supplier. We would also have the option basically to put through our existing contracts through this prepay arrangement to get a discount. So this is going to be a 30-year agreement in terms of the bonds that are going to be issued. And the bonds are non-recourse bonds to SVCE. Now, I've updated the finance committee, and Mike has too, and you've authorized us hiring the professionals to move this forward. So all that's been done. So let's just go to the next slide. So in the past presentation, you've seen this before. There were two basic paths. On the bottom was the documentation and transaction terms. We have two CCAs participating in that. That's EBCE and us. And you have approved hiring of all the professionals, the latest being the one last month where we actually hired PFM to be the financial advisor for this deal. On top, that parallel path is the municipal conduit formation. And there are 4 of us who would be the founding members. And we've hired Oric to basically do this for us. It's going to be about 60,000, 15,000 per agency to create this municipal conduit. So we expect to have this, the work has started, and we expect to bring this to you in January. So status, next step, next slide. So in terms of the status of this overall project, in terms of hiring the professionals, we have hired everyone in the gray boxes. The municipal advisor, you've authorized us hiring the person. So we literally, by the end of this week, we should have signed off on the contract with PFM. We went through an RFP process and selected them. Next slide. So in terms of next steps, we expect to bring you the conduit JPA to the SVCE board for approval. I wrote December, January, but it doesn't look like it's going to be December. I think most likely it's going to be January would be the earliest that I would bring this to you. And then depending on when interest rates get to the right spot, we'll bring you a transaction in, the earliest would be Q1 of 2021. And on that timing, maybe Mike can also comment. But that's essentially what I had. The basic takeaway of this presentation is to give you a status update and tell you that we'll be bringing the JPA conduit to the board in January for approval. That's what I have. Open for questions from the committee.
Okay, let's start with the public. Would our attendee wish to comment on this item? I don't see a hand being raised. So I will close public comment, and I think I saw Liz come up first. Go ahead.
So this is just a finicky comment. I noticed for some reason the way you were listing months and then you went to quarters, and you went first quarter of 2021 and fourth quarter of 2020. Is anybody besides me first reading confused about our fiscal calendar versus the annual calendar?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I can make it clear in other presentations. Yeah, yep. I have that same kind of deal. I kind of look at the previous 4 months on that slide on next steps, kind of prompting Q4 meaning this. But you're right. Given what we have in terms of fiscal year, that has a completely different meaning. Yep.
Okay, I guess that's it for Liz. Next, Howard.
Yeah, mine was half question, half comment. So Grish, we're going to get this whole thing set up, and then it's just going to go into like hibernation mode, waiting for some opportune time. How much does it cost to stay in hibernation mode, and how will we know when that opportune time has come?
Hibernation mode is de minimis. It essentially, the JPA itself has to meet once a year. And so those costs are probably going to be for each of us a few $1,000s a year. Setting it up is costing us 60,000, but it's really de minimis for just the waiting. And your second part of the question was timing? Is that it?
It's more of a, how do we know? I mean, if we're like in hibernation mode, it's not like people are checking the arbitrage rates every week or something and knowing.
Oh,
So how will we know when it's time to go when we're hibernating?
so let me hand that over to Mike Bowanger to answer, but basically all the professionals get paid when a transaction's done. So we have a ton of professionals who are waiting. They're doing all the work up front for nothing. So, but let's see, Mike, do you have an answer for that?
Well, you actually, I think you hit the first and foremost one. You have properly motivated and aligned everybody the same way. So you actually will have people, Howard, monitoring this week to week. I think it's one of those things where you know it when you see it. We need about a 50 to 75 basis point differential between the two borrowing rates. And, you know, as markets move around, you'll see the trend coming, hopefully. Sometimes that's a sustained trend, and sometimes that's a fleeting trend. You know, it could be an opportunity for a week. It could be an opportunity that comes back for years. But it will be something that we just keep monitoring. And, you know, once it's there, we can move very quickly once all the work is done.
And that's a follow-up question. That's likely to be when interest rates are much higher than they are now, right?
More or less, we need them to go up, basically. You really need taxable rates to go up more than tax exempt rates. You know, and just given the dynamic of the world over the last year, those relationships just haven't been anywhere near traditional, where taxables have been cheaper than tax exempt or right at the same levels. Just, yeah, we need a normal market is basically what we need.
And a comment for Girish, it seems to me that we should have kind of set a minimum trigger point ahead of time so that we don't get 35 basis points and say, well, that's close enough. You know, the guys are anxious to get paid, you know, let's go with 35 kind of thing, right? Because we can't quite get to 50. And somehow we need to, I think, ahead of time, have some diligence set in it.
That's been set. Right now, we are targeting an 8% discount being the minimum trigger. So that's basically where it is now. You know, the way this would work is they're going to be monitoring it. They come to us. Maybe we'll say, maybe it's 7%. We say, you know what, it's worth it to go forward. But at this point, we are targeting 8%
Okay.
as the minimum.
Howard, I guess you're finished.
No, I was going to ask the follow-up, which was what's our thresholds, but all that stuff's been covered, so I'm good.
Okay. Javed, you're up next.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just kind of following up. I think what would really be helpful to answer all these questions is for you guys just to do a simple graph, which would be, you know, because the cost to us depends on how much we buy or, you know, prepay. So if you prepay 1 million and the cost is 100,000 a year for the staff or the attorneys or everybody else, and the arbitrage is only 1% makes a difference. I think you can very easily do a graph which says if the arbitrage is 3%, you have to sell at least you know, $5 million worth, and the other side would be, you know, so you've got the cost and how much you have to sell and what the arbitrage is. So based on that, I presume you can give us a graph and say, okay, you know, for a $5 million sale or prepay, we need a 5% arbitrage to cover our costs of doing all this. And I think I've tried to understand that by asking questions last few times, but I think a simple graph, it can't be too complicated because we don't really care what it actually is. We only care about what the arbitrage rate should be for the amount of prepaid that we want to purchase. And then on the other side, you have the cost that's costing us to do that because you got 100,000 or 1 million or whatever additional cost that comes in whenever we go through this arbitrage. Am I making myself clear or is that confusing?
No, you made yourself clear. And so I'll start with it and then maybe we'll have Mike kind of chip in too. So essentially the cost for EBCE and us together is approximately about $1.5 million. So that's the setup cost, okay? So we won't trigger this until we, in combined form, big picture, we have about $3 million of benefit per year. And our initial target is a minimum 5-year term. So we're looking at between 5 to 7 years. So let's take the worst case here as 5 years. So 5 years, $3 million a year is a $15 million benefit. Cost is 1.5 to 2 million. So right away, the benefit is more than this. And to answer the next part of your question, the 3 million total is based on a $700 million bond issuance. So it's exactly what you're talking about, a 700 million bond issuance with the basis differential between 50 to 70 basis points will result in total savings of about 3 million a year with the minimum term of 5 years. So that's 15 million. Our total costs are going to be about $1.5 million to 2 million. Does that touch every aspect of what you talked about?
I appreciate that, and I've had that answer, but I think if you can give us a graph
Yep.
that we can look at and say, okay, now the arbitrage is 4%, we need to at least buy $50 million worth, or
Yep.
for considering, and we know what our costs are. So
Sure.
the cost may fluctuate a little bit, but the arbitrage is what it is going to be, what we are going to be buying. So we've got two fixed parameters. Throw in a graph, and it's a mathematical equation that any board can look at, and you can come back and say, here's the template. Hey, we're really happy to tell you that we just crossed our magic point, and
Great.
we can buy as long as you buy more than that. So
Yep.
give
Mike,
us
you
a
want to
graph
add to that?
make our life
Yep,
so much
great.
easier.
Sure, we could take a stab at something. I think I get what you're talking about. Just recognize there's a lot of different moving pieces. It's not
There
going to be
shouldn't be too
perfect.
many moving pieces. I mean, the arbitrage, it's moving in the sense we don't know what it is, but if it's a graph, we're looking at if it goes to 6%, what's going to be. What we're going to be buying is what we know what it's going to be, and what the costs are maybe moves a little bit, but most of the time, at least you can estimate what the costs are now. So I think we've got fixed things, and just the arbitrage is the only thing that's going to affect whether we're going to be positive or negative on this thing.
Yeah, I'll work on the graph, no problem. The only other thing I would note, and it gets lost in some of this, everything, when we quote all of the savings, it's already net of whatever costs come out up front. So
I know, I just want to see it in the graph. I understand that, but I just want to see in the graph that our costs are going to be 100,000 for 100 million sale. Just put it out there, and we can just look at it and say, fine. If the costs are going to be more than what you had in the graph, we can talk about it. But otherwise, you got a simple, easy graph to follow.
Okay. So why don't we do something where Mike and I will work directly with Java to make sure that we provide him the information he wants in the format that he's looking for, and then we can socialize that with the rest of the board.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. With my engineering background, I guess I'm used to looking at graphs, but
Yep.
And with the lawyer background, I'm used to arguing, so we'll go from there. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Anytime.
I don't see any more hands up. Would anybody like last minute comments? I guess not. Again, this is a discussion item. We don't need a motion. So we'll close item number 4 and go on to item number 5, which is our SVCE rate starting January 1st.
Great. I'm going to start with a couple of slides and then hand it over to Don Bray. So if we could go to slide number 2. So over the last several months, we've talked to you about moving to a 1% discount. And so we want to get into the implementation of a 1% discount on our rates. So we plan to bring it to the board at the December 9th meeting. The budget that you approved for this current year has the discount at 1%. And this is also part of the forecast that we've provided Moody's that we'll be moving to a 1% discount. Next slide. And this is basically what we showed you at our budget meeting on September 9th when you approved the budget. I have a little orange arrow here, which kind of is more of a reminder to say that when we had the budget approved, we assumed a 1% discount from PG&E due to expected increase in PCIA and potential continued load loss due to COVID in order to maintain the credit rating. So this item is talking to you about how we plan to implement it starting January 1, and we'll be bringing this to you to the board December 19th. There are a couple of nuances here which really get into the weeds. We're going to hope to stay away from it. So Don's going to get the high level stuff, but we'll also tell you a little bit about some of the weeds that we have to deal with on this rate. So let me hand it over to Don and go to the next slide, Andrea.
All right. Thanks, Girish. Yeah, in terms of the details behind this, in the 2021 operating budget, we had assumed that the PCIA would go from where it is today at about 3.2 cents a kilowatt hour to 4.8 cents as of October 1st. But that, for a variety of reasons, that got delayed. It now looks like that increase is going to be happening January 1st of 2021. We had anticipated going from a 4% to 1% discount at the time that the PCIA went up. So we had thought that was going to be October. We'd also thought that the PCIA next year was going to fall back as of January, and then through the remainder of the year be 3.7 cents. Fast forward now to January, we're looking at an increase in the PCIA from 3.2 to 4.5 cents. So not quite as high as it was originally anticipated to be in October, but it's going to stay at 4.5 cents throughout the rest of the fiscal year, in fact, calendar year. We're also seeing a decrease in PG&E generation rates. We'd assumed that that was going to be flat. It's actually looking more like a 2 or 2.5% decrease. But complicating that is that it's anticipated those rates are going to go up a little bit in March, and that decrease will be eliminated, may even be a slight increase on about a 1% level. So rates bouncing around on the generation side a little bit too. And the important item, when we're seeing movement this significant in a PCIA or generation change, it's really important that we make the change in rates absolutely as close to when PG&E does as possible, or we strand our customers with added expense in the case of, say, the PCIA going up. So we're hoping to make these rates effective as of the beginning of January, or as close to it as possible. So we need to pre-approve, in a sense, what we're going to be doing with rates at the December meeting, so that we can roll those changes in the rates into the billing system and have everything set to go in January. Next slide. So many of you have seen this slide before. The two columns on the left are the 2020 rate bars, and you can see a 4% discount. That's what we've had going now for a while. But if you look at the 2021 rates, you'll see that that PCIA amount has gone up, which means that we have to move our generation rate down, as the PG&E generation rate is basically staying where it is, and to absorb a portion of that rate reduction requirement that we have. We're looking to reduce the discount from 4 to 1%. Okay, next slide. In terms of some of the special circumstances that Girish mentioned, we are going to have the prospect of negative rates for a few of the billing determinants for some of our large commercial accounts. If you look at the rate that we would be charging our customers for super off-peak, which occurs in the spring during the middle of the day, when solar is peaking and when hydro is peaking. So it actually runs from March through May. from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. Some of our largest customers will in effect have negative rates from us, meaning that PG&E's generation rate is lower than the PCIA is. So to do our rate calculation and set our rate, it would actually be negative. We're working with Calpine. We believe this is doable from a billing standpoint, but whether we implement it as a negative rate or whether we make some other accommodation in one of the other rates to keep them at a 1% discount, we haven't entirely figured out yet. But it is a special kind of corner case we're going to have to deal with for the first time, given how high the PCIA is going to be next year. Okay, next slide. So just bringing it back to the recommendation, we're looking to bring a resolution to the board at the December board meeting to pre-approve this move back to a 1% discount effective as of January 2021. Any questions?
Okay, let's see if any member of the public wishes to address us. I don't see any hands raised, so I'll close public comment. And Howard had his hand up first. Let's go to Howard.
So Don, I'm a little confused. So a negative rate, you mean for every kilowatt they use, we give them money? Is PG&E is giving them money also?
No, PG&E's generation rate will be, let's say, 4 cents, but since the PCIA is 4.5 cents, when we calculate our rate, that drives it negative. So PG&E's gen rate is positive, but in a sense, they're collecting the PCIA some other way through their rate, currently at least. So they don't have the same issue.
This certainly seems like an example, Garish, of how the PCIA must be incorrect. It seems like we need to make this a poster child with the CPUC about how PG&E is screwing everybody with PCIA, and it doesn't reflect the economic realities. If PG&E has got to the point where their total gen rate is less than the PCIA.
So Howard, yes and no. The problem is because all these things are lagged. So
Right.
there's a couple of things. One is there's a lagging effect, and then you have a cap on the rates. And so PG&E undercollects in 1 year. And then when they are collecting in the next year what they were supposed to collect, the PCIA is so-called artificially higher, but essentially they've loaned us money in a previous period that they are now collecting. And so fundamentally, the PCIA calculation, you're right. It's a poster child for how this was not very well thought out. And these kinds of lags and the cap are leading to just outcomes that are not predictable and don't allow us to send a better price signal to our customers. It's a rather intractable problem right now, given the PUC's existing decision and how slowly, how many proceedings they have to be part of to get any solutions to this. So I don't have great news for you. Maybe I'll add one thing, maybe adding to what Don said. PG&E has filed a settlement agreement that we have supported to get the undercollection of the PCIA from the previous year to be spread over the next 3 years and to remove the cap. So if you remove the cap, there'll be one less variable that's going to cause this problem. And for us with rather large reserves, and the second piece is our long-term forecast is the trend of PCIA is going to come down. The issue we have to deal with is volatility. So the PUC has not accepted the settlement. It just got filed last week. And we expect them to review the settlement and factor that into the next rate. But we have assumed in what Don has provided that the settlement will be approved.
Okay, then my second question is the policy side to this. I mean, we have this 1% policy. It just doesn't seem like a good business practice to give away money with the product. This is a pretty involved question. I'll just answer this in the most basic form. Like, should we just say that we don't give away free product? And so we'll be 1% as long as it isn't free? I mean, that seems like a more reasonable business practice than to say for some hours of the day, we're giving you money for every kilowatt you give us. I mean, I'd rather find another way to make the financial transaction with them than to just have a straight, you get a penny for every megawatt hour you use, or whatever it comes out to be.
Yeah, I think that's something that we want to work out, Howard. So one choice is we can say it will never go negative. So we put a floor of 0. And so maybe we can do that, and then the discount's no longer 1%. We can manage that by changing the discount in other periods. This is the super off-peak period. So
Right.
it's just one, it's a subset of the day. So we can change the discount on a different time period so that on average, you have a 1% discount. So this is some of getting into the weeds of rate making. And given that all this is, we don't have the filed rates yet, but we still need to move forward, our recommendation is to allow for us that flexibility to either do a 0 or change it so that the overall rate is 1% less.
I think that over time, we add a whole bunch more solar in the state, even with solar plus storage, et cetera. Like, everybody's going to get negative rates. And it would be really dumb for PG&E to be charging everybody 4 cents and us to be giving away money at that exact same moment.
Yeah.
It feels like we should have more of this as more solar comes online. And it just seems like a strange policy place to be in, where PG&E gets to make 4 cents and we have to lose a cent, say. I'm picking arbitrary numbers, but.
So one thing I will maybe clarify here is the customer is still paying a positive rate, right? They're paying the PCIA for every kilowatt hour they use at that super off-peak period. It's just we're subtracting some money off of the PCIA in effect. So they're going to be paying pretty close to 1% less than what they would have been paying PG&E all in.
I know, but I just look at it from our perspective, right? To our bottom line, we're giving away product and money at the same time. And, I feel like this isn't, I see where we are right now this year at this moment, but to me, it seems like this is going to become more common as the power mix changes in the state. And it's, we all want storage. There's a lot of things we want to do, but I see this imbalance sort of existing. And I don't know. It feels uncomfortable. That's all I can say. And I'm sure it probably feels uncomfortable to everybody else. And I don't have a great answer. That's why I said I'll make a quick flippant comment, but I don't know what the real answer is. But it feels uncomfortable. And maybe that's my comment, Rob. It's just I'm uncomfortable.
Okay.
Yeah. If I may clarify, you're uncomfortable with that. You're not uncomfortable with the overall big picture of going to 1% for all our customers.
Oh, no, I actually
super
very appreciate a rate setting strategy on the part of the board where we give that level of direction, which is tweak everything to be 1%, because I think it makes it easy for us to know and explain. It makes it the direction from the board easy to interpret and to implement. So I love the 1%. But it's this anomaly that makes me feel very uncomfortable.
Yep.
I don't know if this will help at all, but there is a when the PCIA decision came down, as of 2022, late 2021 actually, but for 2022 rates, PG&E is going to have to pull out the PCIA from their generation rate. So it's going to look like more like a non-bypassable charge. They will in effect have the same issue themselves as of 2022. And what's been circulating, at least informally, is that they will make sure that they don't have any rate that is less than what that PCIA is, for very much the same reason we're talking about here. Now, there's a lot that remains to be seen, but yeah, I think this may start to address itself over time because of that exposing of the PCIA for all customers, be they bundled customers or CCA customers.
Okay, and Don, part of the reason it's going negative is this is really, the CCA rate is a catch up for an underpayment. So in reality, if we weren't catching up, we might not actually be negative, right?
Yes, or certainly a lot less negative.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go to Liz next.
Okay, so I'm moving around because there's work being done, so I'm trying to find quiet places.
That's why I'm outside.
So I have two big things. One is that I think the presentation should preempt some of the questions that we've had. The whole discussion about negative pricing, and yet you're saying it isn't, we're really not charging less. And then you said 3 or 4 or 5 things that I think could be part of a slide that simply says, you're going to hear me talking about negative pricing, but keep in mind, this is what it means. And then the bottom line is PG&E is going to deal with it themselves next year. So I'm not sure I can repeat all the different explanations that you gave going through. I wish you could see my hand. I'm making nice gestures. So if that makes sense, I think if there's just a preamble that says we have previously made a decision to go from the 4% to the 1%, no problem. When you see what that means, we're going to have these businesses that are in this super whatever period, we're going to have negative pricing, okay? Negative pricing means all of these things, but don't panic is what I'm getting at. You want to try and preempt our understanding that it's not as bad as it might sound. That's one comment. And then there was another comment that I didn't have time to write down. Let's see, the PCIA, blah, blah, blah. It'll come back to me. If I remember it, I'll let you know. But that was basically explain and preempt the confusion. I think will help.
Okay, so we'll go to Javed while Liz is remembering her last comment.
Thank you. I mean, this is a difficult presentation. I guess you've got the PCIA issue. I'm trying to figure out if this PG&E is trying to worry that the CCAs are going to eat their lunch and they are trying to be more aggressive in some ways. And I don't know if there's some thought that's going on behind that. I also wanted to ask you, I think there's 2 rates that the Silicon Valley Clean Energy charges. One's a green rate and one, I guess, is an all green rate or no carbon related gases involved with the generation. And the 1% discount that is being offered, is it based on the lower rate or the higher rate? I'm not, if you can clarify that for me. And then the second question I am asking is, does it really make a difference if you give them a 1% discount at the time of use where we're losing money, or you could maintain that? Are those customers, are we risking losing customers if we do that, or it really doesn't make any difference? Because if it doesn't really matter and we can give the homeowner a better discount because we are not giving it to the commercial users, should that be something we consider? Those are my questions.
So firstly, the The 1% is on the everyday rate, the green start rate that applies really to all customers. And then if you're on this green prime 100% renewable rate, it's an adder to the green start rate of 0.8 of a cent. So this 1% discount in effect applies to everyone. And then if you're buying the premium product, you're paying a little adder on top of that.
And how many people are on the adder, do you know? What percentage?
About, it winds up being about 2% of our load.
Okay, so not many.
Yeah, I think it's 1.5% of customers.
Okay.
So it's not, it's not something we super actively market. It's sort of for customers that have a particular need for that. Say they're trying to get lead points or.
You said 0.8
the
cents
like.
rather than, you said 0.8 cents rather than a percentage. I mean, you have 1% off on the green start and the others you said was a 0.8 cents adder.
Yeah, it's eight
How does
tenths
it
of
make
a.
a difference in percentage terms?
It adds probably on the order of 10% or so.
10%. You lost me.
Yeah,
Instead of a 1%
10%.
discount, we're giving them, we're making 10% more, or we're giving them a 0.9% discount? 10% of what?
It's about a 10% adder to their rate to be on to get this 100% renewable product, 0.8 of a cent a kilowatt hour.
So in effect, what is their whole discount if they do the adder, or there is no discount?
Well,
That's
they're paying a premium, but again,
There is no discount.
Yeah, there is no discount relative to PG&E. It's a premium to PG&E.
It's actually a premium on top of PG&E of 1%, 2%, 5%. How much?
Yeah, again,
Okay,
close
when you get
to.
a chance, you can get back to
Yeah,
me.
close to. I mean, in round numbers, close to 10%.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
On a generation basis.
Okay, that's it for you, Javed, I guess. Back to Liz.
Thank you. That
I
did.
guess my follow-up, I'm sorry, my follow-up question was, sorry, Liz. Does it affect it if you tell the the commercial customers that we're not giving you this 1% discount on the rates? I mean, because then that would be available to pass on to the home consumers.
Yeah, at least based on the numbers that we have now, right? And we, like Girish said, we haven't seen their actual generation rates yet, but based on today's generation rates and where we think this is going, this would apply to all of our large commercial and industrial customers at this super off-peak period, which again only happens during the middle of the day in March through May. But it is all of our biggest customers, and it would mean if we went to zero and didn't accommodate them in some other way, that they'd likely be getting a better deal with PG&E, and that's something we want to avoid.
Okay.
So
I
I think we've got to accommodate it somehow, but fair question on how we do that.
All right, thank you.
Okay, to Liz.
Thank you, Javed, because that jogged my mind. So one outlandish comment is March through May not be as big of a problem because we're likely still to be under the COVID limitations to some extent through May. That may indirectly help us with our large customers. Two is speaking specifically to how you might bill a credit. You began the presentation talking about how you're going to manage that in the billing process, if I follow correctly. So you could, for example, give a credit. And it could be, you keep the billing the way it is, and then you give them a credit back, right? That's one of the ways of handling it.
Generally, their bill is still going to be positive because we're charging them during the other hours of the day. And the way it's going to work out for most customers, that is going to mean they'll have a positive bill.
Yes.
They'll just be, it'll just be a little less than it would have been.
In other words, this is what I was getting at. In other words, we're the ones that are going to see the reduction in our margin, right?
Again, it's margin. It's the same impact to us margin wise that any 1% less than PG&E would have been. Yeah,
So
so
sorry, I'm not sure I'm asking the question correctly, or I'm
okay.
So this is where the definition of that negative pricing is. And you used an example of 4 cents and 4.5 cents. So that's what's in my mind. So we're going to be charging 4 cents when it's costing us 4.5 cents. As an example.
In the case of if PG&E's gen rate is 4 cents, and then we subtract the 4.5 cent PCIA off of that,
Right.
yeah, we'd be at a negative 0.5 cent
Right.
for that
So the
period.
question is, how do we, 1, bill it, and 2, how does it impact us financially? And 3, how does the customer recognize it? So
Again, the customer is going to still, in almost all cases, see a positive bill because
yes,
the
but-
other hours, right, are gonna, yeah, so.
Yeah, agreed. But business-wise, we're going to know that it's costing us more. Let's see. So, okay.
The net margin changes. It's not the
Thanks, that's
cost.
what I was getting
It's
at.
the net
It's-
margin changes.
Okay, so I'm right. Okay, sorry if I didn't phrase it correctly. Then our net margin does change. Okay, and you began by saying, and maybe it's a moot point now, about how to invoice it. So I was kind of trying to connect the two, maybe unnecessarily.
Yeah, the invoice has line items on it by time of use period. So you'd see other time of use periods, generally there would be 3 or 4 on a bill. Those would be positive, and then this one would be negative. And when you add it all up, it's still going to be a positive charge to the customer.
Right. So you could leave it even and then give them a credit back, so their bill doesn't show the negative. But we can say, based on something, you get this credit back. That's one way.
If I may try and frame it, and Don, please correct me on this, because to try to get to this, it's what we are asking for is maintain a 1% discount for all customer classes. Now, there are different ways of doing it for the super off-peak period. We can either do negative rates, keep it as negative rates, or we can say we are not going to have negative rates, but we can offer a little larger discount on some of the other periods for that customer class, so that net, we still will have a 1% discount, or the customer will have that. I think fundamentally we don't want to have the customer have a better deal with PG&E than with us.
Correct, obviously, yeah.
Correct. So that's the nuance over here. So the last slide, which has the recommendation, is to get us from 4% to 1%. And then between now and the board meeting, let us work out how we are going to do that, whether we keep it as negative rates or keep it as 0 and change other aspects of the rate to keep it as 1%.
I wanted to give you the solution.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what you were heading toward, right?
Trying to get there. Okay, so that's fine. I'm understanding it better, but I do think you need to have a very cautious explanation of what the problem is.
Yeah.
Negative rate means.
And I've made a big note of don't panic, because you shouldn't. That was good input. Yeah, this sounds a lot worse than it really is. It's kind of a mathematical issue and an administrative issue. But at the end of the day, we're right where we would have been otherwise, overall, margin-wise and the like.
You need to say that up front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, good point.
Okay, thank you, Liz. I don't have any more hands up on this item, so we will close this item. And that is the last item on our regular agenda. Does anybody have any comments not on the agenda they want to make, staff or board or committee members? Seeing nobody, then we will be adjourned. Thank you, everybody.